Julian, can you please explain why a federal regulator is requesting historical soil assessment logs from 29? That was the opening volley at 8:54 on a crisp Monday morning, and I had already drained two full travel mugs of break room coffee that tasted distinctly like burnt regret and poor corporate choices. But I did not flinch, nor did I raise my voice. I simply took a slow, measured breath, pinched the bridge of my nose, and delivered the four words I had spoken for nearly a decade whenever our firm was on the verge of legal collapse. I am on it. That was my role. That was who I was. For 9 grueling years, I had been the operational spine holding Apex Corporate Solutions together, serving as the sole guardian of our absolute crown jewel, a $290 million interstate grid integration account with Lander and Holt Energy. It was a massive, volatile beast of a client involving multi-state transmission lines, heavy Department of Energy oversight, strict Environmental Protection Agency mandates, and endless compliance audits. Yet somehow, through sheer discipline and relentless work, I made that entire complex machine run like a quiet microwave clock. I was 54 years old, experienced, methodical, and completely unbothered by the lack of corporate fanfare. I did not require shiny employee recognition plaques, vanity titles, or desperate LinkedIn posts praising my own work ethic. I only expected one basic professional courtesy, which was for my work to be respected. Unfortunately, respect was the first casualty when executive nepotism invaded our upper floors. Enter Chloe Palmer, the 27-year-old daughter of our chief executive officer, Lawrence Palmer. Fresh off a stint at an boutique branding agency, Chloe had been abruptly installed as our executive vice president of corporate strategy. Her total strategic achievements to date consisted of changing our corporate slide decks to pastel color palettes and posting inspirational quotes over stock photos of sunrise cornfields on Instagram. My spine stiffened the moment she began hovering around the executive suites like an expensive, unwanted draft. In corporate parlance, modernizing your department is merely the polite preamble to getting thoroughly screwed by someone who lacks both experience and judgment. Over 9 years, I had navigated 5 major leadership restructurings, 2 hostile takeover threats, 3 budget freezes, and 1 former chief financial officer who attempted to flirt using advanced spreadsheet formulas. I was not easily intimidated, but Chloe possessed that uniquely lethal combination of total incompetence and absolute authority that invariably precedes a catastrophe. She was elevated not because she understood compliance, but because CEO Lawrence Palmer could never say no to his daughter during Sunday brunches. The trouble truly began when Chloe started inviting herself to my high-stakes meetings with Lander and Holt Energy. During a critical multi-agency audit review, she interrupted our client's general counsel, Evelyn Ross, to ask if interstate power substations came with complimentary custom paint schemes. Evelyn Ross, a formidable veteran attorney who could dismantle a corporate board with a single raised eyebrow, had paused, stared at Chloe in bewildered silence, and immediately requested that the meeting be rescheduled. I spent 3 hours smoothing over the damage afterward. So when Chloe strolled over to my corner desk on that fateful Monday afternoon, sipping an iced matcha latte and wearing a tailored blazer like a theatrical costume, I knew trouble was brewing. I watched her tap her manicured fingernails against my master-client contract binder as if its very existence offended her sensibilities. She beamed at me with terrifying enthusiasm and declared that she had been reviewing department synergies to optimize my workflow. When I calmly asked what optimization meant in her mind, she suggested replacing my direct daily liaison calls with automated Google intake forms and rebranding our regulatory compliance division as the Client Happiness Unit. Somewhere deep in a federal energy oversight office, a compliance officer likely felt a cold shiver. I merely took notes, kept my face expressionless, and smiled politely, because when the chief executive's child is determined to step over your body to climb the ladder, arguable logic is entirely useless. The rest of that week descended into an exhausting marathon of crisis mitigation. Lander and Holt Energy flagged a vendor certification mismatch, which I resolved by retrieving a buried 10-year-old permit. They panicked over an unverified invoice amendment, which I resolved within 15 minutes. Because I kept time-stamped physical and digital records of every single correspondence. Meanwhile, Chloe spent her days locked in glass conference rooms with marketing interns, designing colorful org charts that eliminated administrative oversight. By Thursday afternoon, I had logged nearly 50 hours of high-stress work and slept fewer than 9 hours total across 4 days. Yet, by 4:52 in the afternoon, the project authorization was fully signed. The environmental compliance filing was completed, and Client General Counsel Evelyn Ross sent a rare, glowing email directly to my inbox, expressing her profound gratitude for my unwavering precision. I was still reading her email when my calendar chimed at 4:56 p.m. The notification was stark. Meeting at 5 p.m. in Human Resources Room 4B. No subject line, no advance agenda, no organizer listed. When you have navigated corporate corridors for over 30 years, your instincts become razor sharp. You can feel a layoff in the air long before the formal paperwork is printed. My stomach tightened, but I did not panic. I calmly closed my active files, grabbed my leather portfolio, the one I always brought to executive reviews, and walked down the beige hallway toward room 4B. Chloe Palmer was already seated behind the polished oak conference table, exuding the smug confidence of a monarch receiving a conqueror's tribute. Beside her sat HR Director Beatrice Sanders, looking visibly miserable, like a hostage forced to hold a lit fuse. Chloe did not even glance up from her phone until I pulled out a chair and sat down. Silence in a corporate exit meeting is a tactical weapon. I learned long ago to let the inexperienced party speak first and make the initial incision. Chloe cleared her throat, laced her fingers together, and launched into a rehearsed speech packed with modern corporate buzzwords. She declared that after a comprehensive review of departmental synergies, strategic redundancies, and forward-facing operational agility, the firm had decided my role was no longer aligned with their long-term vision. In plain English, I was being fired on the spot. When I turned to Beatrice Sanders, the HR director averted her eyes, sliding a heavy manila folder across the table containing a standard severance agreement and a strict non-disclosure agreement. Chloe smiled with superficial warmth and added that there was no need for concern regarding client accounts, as she and her strategy team would be taking over all client relationships directly to streamline oversight. She gave me until 5:30 p.m. to clear out my personal items. I opened the envelope, glanced at the terms, and let out a quiet, amused puff of air. I stood up, straightened my suit jacket, pushed the unsigned severance package back across the table, and informed them I had no questions. I walked out of room 4B without raising my voice, making a scene, or showing a hint of anger, leaving Chloe looking mildly disappointed that I had not provided a dramatic emotional meltdown to validate her decision. I returned to my corner desk, logged into my workstation, and systematically wrapped up my tenure. I deleted no corporate files, altered no system passwords, and left no unprofessional farewell notes. Everything was left impeccably organized and fully audited. However, before shutting down my computer, I inserted my personal encrypted flash drive into the USB port. I did not copy proprietary client lists or trade secrets. I copied exactly one document for legal protocol, the fully executed, time-stamped copy of Contract Amendment 9C for Lander and Holt Energy. I safely ejected the drive, placed it into my jacket pocket, and packed my personal desk items, including a small framed photograph of my late father, a retired mechanical engineer who had always taught me that fine print and integrity outlast any executive ego. As I walked toward the glass elevators at 5:20 p.m., I passed Chloe laughing near the executive coffee bar. She did not even turn her head. I stepped into the elevator, feeling the cool evening air outside through the glass, smiling softly to myself. Chloe thought she had executed a brilliant corporate power move by removing an expensive senior director. What she did not realize was that she had just walked straight into a legal landmine while wearing designer high heels. By the time I reached my quiet suburban townhouse, I had shed both my tailored suit jacket and the emotional weight of corporate betrayal. My golden retriever greeted me at the front door, oblivious to the fact that 9 years of corporate loyalty had just been erased in an 8-minute HR meeting. I poured myself 2 fingers of neat single malt scotch, sat down at my study desk, and opened my personal laptop. I am not a man who reacts out of petty anger or emotional spite. I am a man of contracts, clauses, timestamped amendments, and enforceable legal language. I remember every single document I have ever negotiated, every conditional covenant, and every protective footnote added during late-night compliance revisions. 6 months prior to my termination, our firm had nearly lost the Lander and Holt Energy account during a massive multi-agency regulatory review caused by an inexperienced junior manager's accounting error. Client General Counsel Evelyn Ross had been so furious that she threatened to pull their entire $290 million portfolio immediately. To save the business, I worked around the clock for 3 weeks to restructure our service level agreement, drafting a binding addendum known as Amendment 9C. Because Evelyn Ross trusted my expertise implicitly and refused to deal with rotating corporate executives, she personally insisted on inserting Section 14C into that amendment. Section 14C was an absolute mandatory liaison clause. It explicitly stipulated that Julian Vance was designated as the exclusive, non-transferable principal regulatory liaison for the entirety of Contract 3B290. Furthermore, the clause explicitly stated that if Julian Vance were terminated, reassigned, or removed from active account oversight without prior written formal consent from Lander and Holt Energy, such action would instantly constitute a material breach of contract under the restatement, 2nd of Contracts, Section 241. Upon such a breach, Lander and Holt Energy retained the immediate right to terminate the $290 million master contract with cause, forfeit all pending vendor payments, and demand immediate financial restitution. When the amendment was finalized 6 months ago, Chloe Palmer had just been appointed EVP of Strategy. Eager to project executive authority, she had eagerly signed off on the document on April 4th without bothering to read a single line of the compliance terms. Sitting in my study at 7:15 p.m. on Thursday evening, I opened my personal secure email client. I did not write a bitter, angry tirade accusing the firm of unfair treatment. Instead, I drafted a short, purely clinical formal notification to Apex Corporate Solutions internal legal counsel. The subject line read, Formal Compliance Flag, Continuity Covenants, on Lander and Holt Contract 3B290. In the body of the email, I wrote, Please be advised that following my involuntary termination on Thursday at 5:00 p.m., a potential material breach of service continuity covenants has occurred regarding Contract 3B290. Pursuant to Section 14C of Amendment 9C, executed on April 4th, designated liaison continuity is mandatory. I attached the executed PDF documents for reference. I CC'd the internal legal department and the executive committee. And, strictly adhering to standard regulatory reporting guidelines, I BCC'd Client General Counsel Evelyn Ross. I clicked send at 7:30 p.m. Then, knowing how corporate bureaucracy operates, I created an automated scheduled dispatch set for 7:45 a.m. the following morning, targeting the personal inboxes of Chief Financial Officer Cheryl Montgomery and Vice President of Client Services. I closed my laptop, took a slow sip of scotch, and slept deeply for 8 hours. While I slept, the legal machinery I had set in motion began its relentless, invisible march. On Friday morning, the executive floor at Apex Corporate Solutions opened with its usual quiet routine. At 8:17 a.m., CEO Lawrence Palmer was sitting in his corner office, admiring the morning skyline and preparing for his second espresso when a high-priority email notification flagged red on his primary monitor. The email originated directly from Evelyn Ross, General Counsel of Lander and Holt Energy. The subject line contained no pleasantries, formal notice of material breach and contract default. Contract 3B290. Lawrence clicked the email. The message was precisely 5 lines long, written with the icy precision of a senior federal litigator. It stated, This correspondence serves as formal notification that Lander and Holt Energy has received documentation indicating a total failure of service continuity covenants under Contract 3B290. The unilateral termination of designated principal liaison Julian Vance without prior written client approval constitutes an immediate material breach pursuant to Section 14C. Effective immediately, all active project operations, fund disbursements, and regulatory filings are frozen pending legal review and potential default termination with cause. Please advise immediately. Lawrence Palmer stared at the monitor screen as if the text were written in an ancient, terrifying script. The color slowly drained from his face. He read the 5 lines once, paused, wiped his brow, and read them a second time. The silence in his office became suffocating. He slowly closed his laptop lid, stood up from his leather executive chair, and walked out into the corridor with measured, unnerving steps. He walked directly into Chloe's office. Chloe was leaning back in her ergonomic chair, scrolling casually through a fashion blog while sipping her morning coffee. Lawrence stood in her doorway, his hands trembling slightly, holding the printed email. In a voice barely above a harsh whisper, he asked, "Tell me you did not terminate his active contract." Chloe blinked in surprise, putting her coffee down. She scoffed and replied that she had simply realigned the compliance department to eliminate expensive redundancies, claiming that Julian was just an overpaid operational dinosaur. Lawrence stepped forward, slammed the paper onto her desk, and shouted that Julian Vance was the uniquely named principal liaison in Section 14C of their largest contract. Chloe's face went pale, but she attempted to defend herself by stuttering that nobody had explicitly flagged Clause 14C during her review. Lawrence looked at his daughter in absolute horror and replied that Julian did not need to flag it because Julian wrote it, and Chloe had signed her own name to it on April 4th. Before Chloe could construct another excuse, Lawrence's desk phone began ringing incessantly back in his office. Internal legal counsel was calling on line 1. The chief financial officer was calling on line 2. The vice president of client services was waiting on line 3. Outside the glass walls of the executive suite, the entire floor was beginning to vibrate with palpable panic. Department managers were hurrying down hallways with thick project binders. Junior analysts were huddled around monitors in hushed disbelief, and emergency meeting notifications were flashing across every corporate calendar. Lawrence turned back to his daughter, his voice trembling with rage, and told her that if her last name were not Palmer, she would already be escorted out of the building by security. He stormed back to his office, leaving Chloe staring at her desk and frozen, mounting terror as the realization hit her that her reckless power move had just pulled the pin on a corporate hand grenade. By 10 o'clock on Friday morning, the atmosphere inside Apex Corporate Solutions had deteriorated from controlled anxiety into absolute, unadulterated chaos. The internal legal department was tearing through physical filing cabinets and digital archives like a forensic squad searching a crime scene. Paralegals were frantically querying contract repositories, searching for any addendum, secondary designation memo, or emergency delegation clause that might provide a legal loophole. They found absolutely nothing. There was no backup liaison listed in the federal regulatory filings. There was no secondary officer authorized to sign off on interstate grid compliance. In fact, the only document filed regarding Julian Vance's departure was Chloe Palmer's internal HR announcement, in which she had arrogantly written that Julian's operational duties would be absorbed by the strategy team effective immediately. When senior legal counsel read that sentence aloud during an emergency briefing, she closed her eyes in profound despair. The concept of replacing a 54-year-old regulatory compliance expert with a team of 20-something social media coordinators on a $290 million federal energy account was not merely incompetent. It was legally indefensible. To make matters infinitely worse, client general counsel Evelyn Ross had completely cut off communication with Apex management. Between 10:15 a.m. and 11 a.m., client services attempted to contact Lander and Holt Energy 4 separate times. Every phone call went directly to automated voicemail. Formal emails sent by vice presidents received cold automated read receipts, but 0 human replies. Then came 11 o'clock a.m., the exact time for the mandatory weekly operational conference call between Apex leadership and Lander and Holt executives. For 9 consecutive years, through severe winter blizzards, minor system outages, and corporate restructurings, Julian Vance had led that 11 o'clock Thursday call without a single absence. At 11 o'clock on this Friday, the conference line remained eerily silent. Lander and Holt Energy did not join the scheduled call. The complete silence from the client was far more terrifying than a shouted reprimand. It signaled that their legal team was already preparing formal litigation. At 11:30 a.m., CEO Lawrence Palmer summoned an emergency executive session in Conference Room 2C. The heavy blinds were drawn tight, blocking the view from the main floor. But everyone walking past could hear the muffled tension inside. Seated around the long mahogany table were CEO Lawrence Palmer, CFO Cheryl Montgomery, Senior Legal Counsel Beatrice Sanders, and a thoroughly shaken Chloe Palmer. CFO Cheryl Montgomery pulled up her financial impact dashboard on the central display screen. She did not bother with diplomatic introductions. She presented the cold, brutal numbers. If Lander and Holt Energy exercised default termination under Section 14C, Apex would suffer an immediate direct loss of $61.2 million in fourth-quarter revenue. Furthermore, the contract default would trigger cross-default clauses across 3 secondary joint venture accounts, resulting in an additional indirect loss of $142 million over the next 12 months. Cheryl pointed out that their corporate credit rating would be downgraded to junk status by Monday morning, freezing their active credit lines and exposing the board of directors to catastrophic shareholder lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty and executive gross negligence. Chloe Palmer, sitting nervously at the corner of the table, attempted to interject. With her signature branding jargon, she suggested that the entire situation was merely a communication misstep that could be resolved by flying her team to client headquarters with high-end pastry gift baskets and presenting a polished video presentation titled "Meet the New Agile Strategy Team." Senior legal counsel looked at Chloe with absolute disdain, adjusting her glasses with slow precision. She informed Chloe that federal energy regulators do not accept pastry baskets as substitutes for mandatory compliance certifications, nor do federal courts dismiss material contract breaches because a corporate executive created a colorful slide deck. Chloe then defensively snapped that the firm should simply sue Julian Vance for tortious interference, alleging that he had set a trap. CFO Cheryl Montgomery slammed her tablet onto the table and shouted that Julian had not set a trap. He had simply done his job by enforcing the explicit terms of a contract that Chloe had signed without reading. In a fit of uncontrolled frustration, CEO Lawrence Palmer grabbed his expensive fountain pen, squeezed it until the plastic barrel snapped in half, and hurled it into the trash bin. While executive leadership argued behind closed doors, news of the crisis began leaking across every department in the building. By 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, employees were whispering near the water coolers and sending encrypted private messages across internal chat channels. An eagle-eyed senior analyst in compliance had unearthed a forgotten corporate governance addendum from 2021. The policy explicitly stated that any executive decision involving the termination or reassignment of client-mandated key personnel required dual authorization from 2 independent non-related corporate officers. Because Chloe Palmer was the CEO's daughter, her unilateral firing of Julian Vance without secondary board approval was a direct violation of internal corporate governance policies. The firing was not only a material breach of the external client contract, it was an illegal executive action under internal company bylaws. Meanwhile, the economic contagion began spreading to secondary accounts. At 2:45 p.m., a secondary renewable energy client sent a formal letter notifying Apex that they were placing a temporary freeze on all fourth-quarter project disbursements until Apex could provide certified proof of regulatory compliance continuity. Within 6 hours of Julian Vance's dismissal, Apex Corporate Solutions had lost control of over $300 million in active client management. Inside her corner office, Chloe Palmer was pacing back and forth in total panic. Her polished composure had completely evaporated. She discarded her designer high heels, pulled her hair into a messy bun, and dialed Julian Vance's personal mobile number for the 4th time. When the call went directly to voicemail once again, Chloe left a breathless, desperate message, pleading with Julian to call her back immediately so they could discuss an emergency consulting arrangement to save the firm from ruin. While Chloe Palmer was desperately pacing her office floor and leaving panicked voicemails, I was sitting comfortably on the shaded outdoor patio of a high-end downtown bistro, enjoying a hot cortado and a light lunch. Across the small wrought iron table sat Diana Cross, a brilliant senior partner at Orion Advisory Group and a close personal friend of client general counsel Evelyn Ross. Diana smiled warmly over her coffee cup, looking at me with immense professional respect. She remarked that she had seen many executive restructurings in her 30 years of legal practice, but she had never seen a seasoned director dismantle an arrogant corporate executive so cleanly using a single contract footnote. I took a slow sip of my coffee and responded that I had not dismantled anyone. I had simply maintained rigorous documentation and allowed gravity to complete its natural work. Deanna leaned forward and handed me a official leather-bound folder. Inside were the completed state incorporation documents and federal tax identification papers for my new independent consulting entity, Vance Advisory LLC. Diana explained that Evelyn Ross had already contacted her early Friday morning to confirm that Lander and Holt Energy had zero intention of ever working with Chloe Palmer or Apex Corporate Solutions again. However, Lander and Holt Energy remained fully committed to retaining my personal expertise to oversee their $290 million energy portfolio. Diana's firm, Orion Advisory Group, had agreed to act as the primary administrative umbrella, allowing Vance Advisory LLC to step in immediately as the exclusive prime regulatory consultant for Lander and Holt Energy. My new independent retainer fee was structured at a 30% premium over my previous corporate salary. With absolute operational autonomy and zero executive oversight from unqualified middle managers. I reviewed the incorporation documents, signed the partnership agreement with my fountain pen, and thanked Diana for her swift collaboration. While I was finalizing my new business structure downtown, the reckoning inside Apex Corporate Solutions reached its climax. At 6:00 p.m. on Friday evening, the chairman of the board of directors convened an emergency closed-door session in the main executive boardroom. By order of the board, Chloe Palmer was explicitly barred from entering the room. CEO Lawrence Palmer sat at the foot of the long conference table, flanked by corporate legal counsel and financial auditors. The chairman, a stern retired federal judge, opened the meeting by reading Section 14C of Amendment 9C directly into the official board minutes. He then presented the forensic legal audit, which confirmed that Lawrence Palmer had allowed his daughter to exercise unvetted executive authority, violate internal corporate governance rules regarding nepotism, and execute a unilateral firing that triggered an immediate $61.2 million default breach. The chairman looked down at Lawrence Palmer with absolute coldness. He stated that Lawrence had committed an egregious failure of executive oversight, exposing the corporation to catastrophic financial liability and severe breach of fiduciary duty under state corporate law. The board unanimously voted to freeze Lawrence Palmer's executive bonuses, strip him of all client management authority, and initiate an immediate independent governance audit into his executive decisions. Furthermore, the board instructed legal counsel to prepare a formal corporate resolution revoking Chloe Palmer's executive title and terminating her employment with cause to mitigate shareholder litigation. When the formal board meeting adjourned at 7:30 p.m., Lawrence Palmer remained seated alone in the darkened boardroom, looking at the empty chairs, realizing that his attempt to secure his daughter's corporate legacy had instead destroyed his own 30-year career. At 8 o'clock on Friday evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the empty city streets, Chloe Palmer finally left the Apex building for the last time. She walked out carrying a single cardboard box containing her personal items, her head lowered, avoiding the gaze of the evening janitorial staff. Her desperate attempts to reach out to client executives had been completely ignored. Her high-handed strategic initiatives had collapsed into legal ruin, and her short-lived corporate career had ended in total ignominy. She had believed that a wealthy executive last name and an elevated title gave her absolute power over experienced professionals. She learned too late that in the high-stakes world of corporate compliance, fine print, legally binding contracts, and operational competence will always crush unearned arrogance. The final decisive checkmate landed on Monday morning at precisely 7:12 a.m. A formal electronic document was transmitted from the legal office of Lander and Holt Energy directly to the personal inboxes of every member of the Apex Board of Directors. The letter, signed personally by Client General Counsel Evelyn Ross, was absolute and unappealable. It formally notified Apex Corporate Solutions that Lander and Holt Energy was exercising its legal right under Section 14C of Amendment 9C to execute an immediate default termination of Master Contract 3B290 with cause, citing material breach of service continuity covenants under the restatement, Second of Contracts, Section 241. Effective immediately, Apex's administrative credentials to the Federal Energy Procurement Portal were permanently revoked. All active project funding was frozen, and formal demands were issued for the immediate return of all unexpended operational retainers. However, the final paragraph of Evelyn Ross's letter delivered the ultimate strategic blow. The letter explicitly announced that Lander and Holt Energy had entered into a new, long-term master advisory agreement with Vance Advisory LLC, appointing Julian Vance as their exclusive principal regulatory consultant. All future regulatory filings, grid integration oversight, and multi-million-dollar compliance operations would be managed exclusively through my new firm. Lander and Holt Energy had not merely left Apex Corporate Solutions. They had transferred their entire $290 million portfolio directly to me, completely bypassing the corporate middleman that had attempted to cast me aside. At 8:30 a.m. on Monday, CFO Cheryl Montgomery read the final client termination letter aloud to the assembled board members and department heads in the main conference room. The room was deathly quiet. There were no outbursts of anger, no frantic arguments, and no desperate attempts to formulate a recovery plan. The board members simply sat in stunned, solemn silence, fully absorbing the magnitude of their defeat. Apex Corporate Solutions had lost its premier client, suffered a $61.2 million direct revenue collapse, faced imminent corporate downgrade, and earned a permanent reputation for severe executive incompetence. The board immediately passed a resolution appointing an interim chief executive officer to manage the corporate restructuring and prepare for impending shareholder lawsuits. At 9:00 a.m. that same morning, I arrived at my new executive suite located on the 34th floor of a premier downtown commercial tower. The office was bright, spacious, and filled with warm morning sunlight. From my expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, I had a panoramic view of the entire city skyline, including the distant glass tower of Apex Corporate Solutions. My new desk was crafted from solid dark walnut, completely clear of corporate clutter, except for a sleek laptop, a fresh notebook, and the small framed photograph of my late father resting proudly near the monitor. I logged into my professional network account and updated my title to Principal Consultant and Managing Partner at Vance Advisory LLC, specializing in complex energy grid compliance and high-stakes corporate account recovery. Within minutes, my inbox was flooded with congratulatory messages from former industry colleagues, regulatory officials, and corporate clients seeking my independent advisory services. As I sat back in my leather executive armchair, taking a slow sip of hot coffee, I felt a deep, quiet sense of professional fulfillment. I had spent 30 years navigating corporate environments, consistently delivering flawless work, while arrogant executives took the credit and unearned promotions. When Chloe Palmer fired me at 5 o'clock on that Thursday afternoon, she believed she was discarding an overpaid, replaceable dinosaur. She did not understand that true professional authority is built on knowledge, integrity, and ironclad contracts, not corporate titles or executive lineage. I had not sought revenge, nor had I acted with malice. I had simply written the protective clauses, maintained perfect compliance, and let the law take its natural course. I looked out over the sunlit skyline, picked up my pen, and began drafting the new operational framework for Lander and Holt Energy. Entirely calm, completely victorious, and finally the master of my own destiny.